Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the February Virtual Planetarium. And as ever, we're going to start off with the inner solar system and work our way out into the universe from there. So let's start with Mercury. It's best seen at the start of February when it's visible in the evening sky. It sets about 70 minutes after the sun on the 1st of February. But at magnitude 1.4, I'm afraid it's not very bright. And this time it will be quite difficult to locate it, especially if you live in a city.
Yeah, it's not ideal, is it?
No.
1.4. But it does, it reaches inferior conjunction on the 8th of February, and then it re-emerges into the morning sky, and it will be close to that close pair of planets, Jupiter and Saturn, over the last half of the month. But unfortunately, that's not a good part of the sky at this time of year, is it? Because the ecliptic angle is quite shallow, so they don't get up very high.
No, and as I say, I think if you live in a town or a city, it's probably going to be quite difficult because you'll need to get a clear horizon, really, to be able to see it. Moving further out, planet Venus, magnitude minus 3.9, so very bright.
It's a bit brighter, yeah.
A bit brighter in the morning sky, but unfortunately, due to the same problems you've just mentioned, Pete, the shallow ecliptic angle, it's quite poorly positioned. And Venus is now moving rapidly back towards the Sun.
That's right.
Where it'll have a superior conjunction in a couple of months. So,
I think it's next month, isn't it? 25th of March, something like that?
Yes, it's not far away. It's not too far away. It is in March. So we're losing Venus as well, and shortly after that it will reappear in the evening sky, but it's going to take some time to become prominent again.
There's one thing worth mentioning, that Venus and Jupiter will be 31 arc minutes apart. That's half a degree apart on the 11th of February. That's going to be pretty difficult to spot, but you might be able to see it in daylight, but you have to be really careful with that because the pair will only be 10.6 degrees from the sun. So if you're not sure what you're doing, don't attempt it.
No, absolutely. Moving out then, the outer planets now. Mars, which has been such a splendid treat. It's been a great Mars apparition. We've seen the shrinking of the South Polar Cap. We've seen dust storms start up and change some of the surface features. But now it really is on its way out for a while. What is it?
It's a pity, isn't it, that the apparition was somewhat spoilt by the weather.
Yeah,
from the UK.
It is quite a shame because, particularly, as we were hoping to look for those Mars flashes as well. But not only was the weather terrible, but a dust storm erupted in that region.
Yes, right.
And put a stop to all of that. So it just goes to show, Pete, that your idea about observing Mars is cursed might have some sort of truth to it after all.
Indeed.
So it starts at magnitude plus 0.4 on the 1st of February, but it's dropped down to 0.9 by the end of the month, and it's shrinking in size. So it starts off at about 7.9 arc seconds at the start of February, but it's shrunk right down to 6.4 arc seconds.
Ouch.
You really will need a large telescope to see any details on a disk that size.
But there is a nice meeting between a 40% lit waxing crescent moon and Mars on the evening of the 18th of February, when both objects will be about 5 degrees apart. So there's still some nice things to see. And of course, as we are getting towards the end of the month and through into March, then Mars will be very close to the Pleiades. So that should be something to look out for.
Yes, that'll be quite nice. But unfortunately, that's going to be it until about a year, really, or more, before Mars becomes a viable target again. So we've had the best of it for a little while. But nonetheless, it's been nice to have it a bright planet in the northern skies at a reasonable altitude. I mean, that's not been happening for quite some time.
No, absolutely right. Talking of planets which haven't been at a very high altitude, but they did put on a show in December, of course.
They did.
Jupiter and Saturn. Now they're re-emerging from solar conjunction into the morning sky, so they're not going to be very easy to see. By the 28th of February, Jupiter and Saturn may be seen above a very flat southeast horizon shortly before sunrise, and Mercury will be visible too, shining away at mag plus 0.4, slightly above the line joining Jupiter to Saturn. So that'll be 3 planets all together at that time.
But very low down.
Yeah, very
but
low
worth
down.
getting if you can. If you can find somewhere. Maybe a lot of people do tend to sort of drive out and find places where they can observe, from very flat surroundings. So it's worth doing if you intend to do that.
Yeah.
Moving out, the ice giants, Uranus, well, it's now losing altitude as darkness falls. You could catch it in the evening twilight, but it's not particularly easy. But it still manages, though, 46 degrees from the centre of the UK. That's a reasonable altitude as darkness starts to fall at the start of the month. So you can get it. You'll need binoculars or a small telescope to be able to find it. But it's worth doing if you can get it. And I have to say, out of all the planets so far, Uranus has been the one that's been the highest altitude.
I know. That's quite depressing, isn't it? Neptune is compromised this month, only achieving 13 degrees altitude above the west-southwest horizon on the 1st of February under truly dark conditions. You'll need binoculars to see it, as it's now at magnitude plus 8. And by the time the end of the month has arrived, Neptune will be lost to the evening twilight, so we'll have to wait again. And actually, when it comes back into the morning sky, it's badly positioned because of that low ecliptic angle.
Yes.
So it takes ages, doesn't it, for it to actually come back into a decent position. So it'll be sort of as we're heading into late summer, autumn next year.
Well, we do have some nice specials this month, although some of them are difficult targets. One I think is certainly one of my favourites is the one on the 12th of the month. Although not optimally positioned, it is possible to spot a 1% lit waxing lunar crescent in the evening skies.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, so from the UK, this is going to be an extremely thin moon, and it will be located above the west-southwest horizon. A little to the left of the position where the sun has set. So the best time to look is from 15 minutes after the sun has set, and the moon, because the moon sets 40 minutes after sunset. So when the sun has gone down, you might want to try and use some binoculars to scan the horizon, make sure the sun is below the horizon before you do that, to try and pick it up. And I do quite like trying to pick up these thin crescent moons. They're quite good fun to chase.
Yeah, they are. They're incredibly difficult, actually. I mean, if you're used to seeing the moon against a dark sky, you think, well, the moon's easy to find. But when it's in that thin phase against a bright twilight sky, it's remarkably difficult to find. I can remember trying for it on several occasions where the clouds were creeping up, because you tend to get a sort of the low level clouds where you're looking at them in a foreshortened way, and so it looks like there are more clouds than there actually are. If you were underneath them, they'd probably be quite thin above you, but they're there low on the horizon. They creep up to meet where the moon is, and so you're in a bit of a panic to try and actually capture it. And I remember doing it with a camera once and just getting very frustrated and giving up, thinking, no, I haven't managed to get it. And then when I took the camera in, downloaded the images, had a quick look through, there it was, this really ultra thin crescent, and it's just like a broken line almost.
It is. It's hairline thin, some of them. They really are incredibly thin.
Yeah, absolutely.
And hardly any colour or texture at all. It's quite an unusual sight, actually.
It is, yeah. Well, if you find it too difficult on the 12th, then have a go for it on the 13th, because the moon will be 4% lit then as a waxing crescent, so it should be a lot easier to see above the west-southwest horizon, approximately 50 minutes after sunset.
On the 19th, we have the evening's first quarter moon, which sits close to the Pleiades and the Hyades star clusters. These are open clusters in the constellation of Taurus. Now, telescopic view of the moon just after 11 o'clock UT will show the peaks of the central mountains in the crater Aristillus. So it's illuminated like a small star cluster, although I don't think it will look much like the Pleiades, but still, it'd be quite nice.
It's quite an amazing group of peaks. I have seen that and I have photographed it. and it's like a small town meeting in the middle of the crater. That's what it always reminds me of. But it is well worth looking out for, because it sort of takes you aback. You don't sort of expect that appearance inside a crater.
No, I've only seen it once, and that was by accident. And I had to go and look up, so what on earth have I seen here? Because it could also look like spaceships sitting in a crater.
Don't start the conspiracy theories.
No, quite right. But they are mountain peaks. In actual fact, the nice thing to do, if you could do it, is to follow how the progress of the sun. If you watch it over a couple of hours, you'll see more and more of the mountains becoming revealed. And it's actually quite a pretty sight.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there are a number of events to do with the moon, which we'll be looking at this month. And one of them will occur on the 21st, when we'll have a clear-obscure effect, which is known as the jeweled handle, which is when you get the Jura Mountains, which border the semicircular Sinus Iridum, the Bay of Rainbows, on the northwest shore of Mare Imbrium. When the dawn light catches the top of those mountains, it looks like an arc hanging off into the Terminator. And that's what's known as the jeweled handle. And then on the 23rd, if you can look at the evening moon, you might be able to see a bright star-like dot to the west of the bright crater Aristarchus. This is another clair-obscure effect, which is known as the star-tipped mountain. I don't know if you've ever seen that one, Paul.
I have not, actually, so I shall have to look out for this myself. I think it's because by then the moon's getting quite large, so I tend to only look at the moon when it's in the small crescent phase. But I haven't actually seen that, although Aristarchus is a bright crater.
Very bright,
in any case. I haven't seen that particular clair-obscur effect.
Okay, well, it's worth also mentioning with the moon on the 25th, the libration, that's the rocking and rolling effect, which means that we see a bit more of the moon's surface than you would expect if it was completely locked towards the Earth. It will be favourable for the southwest limb of the moon. So as full moon approaches on the 25th, it will tilt that towards us, that part of the moon towards us, and that's where that fantastic basin structure known as Mare Orientale. Actually, that's just the central bit, Mare Orientale, but you've got a ring of mountain ranges around it with little dark lava lakes in between those mountain ranges. And that's worth looking for. It
is worth looking for. And in fact, this was one of the regions of the moon. It wasn't discovered by Patrick and H.P. Wilkins, but they did make it more prominent. They did advertise that this region was there. They did promote it. So I don't actually have any drawings of the Mare Orientale, this vast ring basin. Right. But I would like to get one. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it will be clear on the 25th. Right, well, moving out into the rest of the universe then. February is the shortest month of the year. What's interesting is how quickly, this time of year, the constellations of winter really start to fade and drop out of view. Orion is a particularly good example. So it's there early on in the evenings at the start of February, but by the end of February, it's practically lost into the twilight. It's remarkable.
It is. Well, it's got a natural sort of drift over towards the west anyway, as all the stars do from one day to the next. They move a degree further to the west, effectively. Which means that they appear in the same position slightly earlier one evening to the next. And then you've got the effect of the twilight expanding as the sun gets higher in the sky. So as we go into spring, we get the sort of burst of daylight sort of coming into that bit, and it just comes up and envelops Orion really quickly. So if you've got it in your diary that you want to have a really good look at Orion, you need to get your finger out and actually do it, because it has caught me out in the past where you're waiting for it. You think, right, a nice clear night, I'm going to go for that when the moon's out of the way. Oh, it's gone.
Yes, although you're particularly lucky because you've got a good western horizon, but that's certainly happened to me. We should perhaps have a look at some of the things in Orion. We've got the main stars, which are very identifiable. The southwest corner is marked by the bright blue supergiant Rigel, or Beta Orionis.
Yeah.
And if you compare Rigel's colour with the orange Betelgeuse, which is in the northeastern corner, so top left, the difference in colour is quite striking.
It is. It's very good, isn't it? Yeah, and it stands out well.
And be interested to see whether Betelgeuse goes through any more of its dimming and winking that we had between in the last year. You remember how faint Betelgeuse got? It'd be interesting to see if that sort of phenomena continues.
I'm still waiting for the because when it started to get fainter, there were a number of people said, "I know it's gone off as a supernova. The explosion will reach us soon." I'm still waiting for that.
Yeah, I think a number of people. I don't know why the misunderstanding happened, because supernova explosions are renowned for the stars getting brighter, not fainter. So I think it's unlikely.
Yeah, I know. Well, in the end, it was dust, wasn't it, that coalesced in front of the star, and it just dimmed the light completely.
Yeah, I think in one of these virtual planetariums, Pete, we actually said that. I think we hypothesized it was probably dust, because these red giants, as they contract and expand, they tend to produce a lot of dust, and that's what produces this semi-irregular variability to a lot of these red giants. So it's not surprising that that's what it turned out to be in the end.
Absolutely. Well, the main pattern of Orion, of course, is those two stars mark the northeast corner, that's Betelgeuse, and the southwest corner with Rigel. But in between, you've got the three stars which represent the Hunter's Belt, Mintaka, Alnilam, and Alnitak. And then in the upper, or the northwest corner, I should say, you've got Bellatrix, and the faintest of the seven main stars in the southeast corner is Safe, which means sword, which is slightly odd because his sword is actually the little faint line of stars hanging down from his belt.
Yes, and if we were to extend the Rigel through Betelgeuse line approximately 2 times, we arrive at a pair of bright and similar like stars, Castor and Pollux, in the constellation of Gemini, the twins. These represent the head of these two figures. That's actually quite a nice little constellation, Gemini. I think
yes,
it's quite a striking constellation. Now, although Castor sorry, Pete, go on.
Well, I was going to say that Gemini represents the twins, and I often describe it as looking like a rectangle with a short side of the rectangle being Castor and Pollux, and then the rectangle heading back towards Orion. But actually, if you've got a good imagination, you can see the stick figures which represent the twins hand in hand, with their feet back towards Orion. And if with a little bit of work, you can see them pretty well. Yeah,
it's one of those few constellations that does bear some resemblance as to what it's supposed to be.
Yes, that's right.
Although Castor and Pollux look similar at first, if you look at them carefully, you can see that they're actually a little bit different. Pollux, the star to the south, is slightly brighter and redder than Castor.
Yeah, it definitely is. And that's quite an interesting observation, isn't it? Because if you first looking at them, you do think of them as being more or less the same.
Yes.
But they definitely aren't. Okay, well, extending Orion's belt northwest brings us to orange Aldebaran. And if you extend a line from Aldebaran to Pollux, that's the southernmost of those two stars, and use binoculars or a low-power telescope to look at the midpoint of that line, you'll find a beautiful, rich open cluster known as Messier 35. And it is a beauty. I like M35 a lot.
Yeah, it's one of these clusters that I think often gets overlooked because the winter skies contain so many obvious deep sky objects. This is one of those that, if it was in the summer skies or in a more prominent position, would probably be much more talked about. I think it's one of my favourite of all the open clusters.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a dimmer cluster just to the southwest of it as well, which is NGC 2158, and that's approximately 3 times more distant than the 3,870 light years of M35. So that's why it looks smaller and dimmer. But given clear skies, it should be possible to see the moon pass in front of M35 several times during 2021, the next favourable event occurring in the early morning of the 18th of April. So that's something to look out for.
Yes. And Orion, going back to Orion, it's a useful navigational guide. If we extend the line from Rigel through Bellatrix, the star, this is the star in Orion's northwestern corner, if we extend that line twice the distance, we arrive at Elnath, which is Beta Tauri. And this is a star of dual nationality.
Yes.
It used to belong to Auriga, the charioteer, and it was, I believe, designated Gamma Aurigae.
However,
it's now subsequently reassigned to the constellation of Taurus and marks the tip of the bull's northern horn. So interesting migration from one constellation to the other.
Of course, it hasn't moved at all. That's the International Astronomical Union making that redesignation as they've drawn up the boundaries of the constellations. But it's interesting that that's happened a few times with stars, but in the case of Taurus and Auriga, if you look on star charts, you often see Auriga and Taurus connected at that star. So it hangs on to that original identity. But at the top of it's like a misshapen pentagon, isn't it, Auriga?
Yes.
At the top of that, or the northern part of that, you've got Capella, which is a beautiful yellow-hued star. And it stands out really, really well. And to the southwest of Capella, there's a little small isosceles triangle of stars representing baby goats, and that's an asterism known as the Kids.
It's quite a pretty little asterism, and surprisingly easy to pick out, actually.
Yes, it is.
It's very easy to see.
Okay, well, if we project Earth's rotational axis into the sky, you'll end up with 2 points, which are the celestial poles. And these are the points in the sky around which all the stars in the constellations appear to turn. In the northern hemisphere, we have the mid-bright star Polaris, Alpha Ursa Minoris, which lies about 3/4 of a degree from the northern celestial pole. And that's really easy to see from the distinctive pattern, or really easy to find, I should say, from the distinctive pattern known as the plough or the saucepan. I always get into trouble for calling it the saucepan, but it looks exactly like a saucepan, I'm afraid, which is high in the northeast, early evening at this time of year. And it's quite an interesting orientation, isn't it, at this time of year? Because it looks like it's balancing on the tip of its handle.
It is, and it's quite distinctive because it looks a bit like a question mark when it's at that sort of angle. It is quite a distinctive thing to see, the constellation, because it isn't normally like that. It isn't normally up on its side. But it is a very useful way of finding the pole star. Merak and Juby, the two end stars in the saucepan, in the bowl of the saucepan. If you extend a line to the left, you will come up to Polaris. That's why they're called the pointers. And interesting, the area between Capella and Polaris is occupied by a very dim, I should say, constellation known as Camelopardalis.
Oh dear.
Represents the giraffe.
It's just incredibly dim, isn't it?
It is.
It's got an interesting name, actually, because it is a giraffe. That's what it represents. And that in the ancient times, it was believed that a giraffe was a cross between a camel and a leopard, hence the name.
Yeah. Well, although it's actually a faint constellation, there's actually two very interesting objects in it that I observe semi-regularly, and that's the variable stars Z-Cam and X-Cam. So it does have a number of things of interest in it, so it is worth seeking out.
It's also got Campbell's Cascade as well, which is a lovely line of stars that ends in a small open cluster. And to find Campbell's Cascade, you have to go to the W shape of Cassiopeia. And basically, if you imagine what the W would look like the right way up, i.e. as a W, you draw a line from the star on which marks the right edge of the W, that's Beta Cassiopeia, and draw a line from that through the star marking the left edge of the W, that's Epsilon Cas, extend that for the same distance again, and that will bring you directly to Campbell's Cascade. That's an easy way to find it.
It is, and it's a very pretty little selection of stars. And I like the fact they're all slightly different colours. They look like a little row of Christmas lights.
That's very nice, very pretty description. So there's plenty to see in the night sky. If you're still got your telescopes out after Christmas, then just keep them going, and you'll see that the stars are constantly changing. You're getting different things to look at. So there's always plenty to have a look for and enjoy. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks, Pete.